Have you ever met someone so aggressively wholesome it actually felt a bit threatening? Or maybe you've seen a public figure crusade against a specific vice, only to be caught indulging in that exact thing behind closed doors? This isn't just hypocrisy. It's a survival strategy used by your unconscious mind. In psychology, we call this reaction formation. And today we're breaking down the science of why your brain sometimes flips your true feelings upside down to protect you. The architecture of the internal conflict. To understand reaction formation, we have to look at the structural model of the mind proposed by Anna Freud. As a pioneering psychoanalyst and the primary developer of ego psychology, she detailed in her 1936 book, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense, how the mind manages unacceptable thoughts. Reaction formation occurs when a person experiences an impulse that causes them intense anxiety or shame. To manage this, the ego, the part of the mind dealing with reality, represses the original impulse and replaces it with its polar opposite. This creates a psychological buffer that prevents the person from having to acknowledge a part of themselves they find repulsive or dangerous. The science of self-defense. While the concept originated in psychoanalysis, modern social psychologists have found empirical evidence for it. Dr. Roy Baumeister, a leading researcher in the field of self-regulation and social psychology, explored this in his peer-reviewed meta-analysis published in the Journal of Personality. Baumeister argues that defense mechanisms aren't just about hiding from the id. They are about protecting our self-esteem. When our internal desires conflict with our desired self-image, reaction formation steps in to overcorrect. This is why the behavior is often characterized by exaggeration and rigidity. If someone is genuinely kind, they are usually relaxed about it. If someone is using reaction formation to hide underlying anger, their kindness often feels forced, loud, or too much, because they are working overtime to convince both the world and themselves of their virtue. Empirical evidence. The Adams study. One of the most cited studies in this area was conducted by Dr. Henry Adams, a clinical psychologist at the University of Georgia. Published in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, 1996, Adams investigated the link between homophobia and sexual arousal. By using plethysmographic measurements to track physiological responses, Adams and his colleagues found that men who identified as highly homophobic showed significant sexual arousal to same-sex imagery, while non-homophobic men did not. The study suggested that the outward aggression and moral opposition were actually a reaction formation against their own internal desires that they found socially or personally threatening. The long-term impact on mental health. How healthy is this mechanism? Dr. George Vaillant, a Harvard psychiatrist who spent decades tracking human development through the Grant study, classified reaction formation as a neurotic defense. In his work, Adaptation to Life, Vaillant explains that while reaction formation is more mature than something like total denial, it can still be damaging over time. Because the behavior is a mask, it requires a constant expenditure of psychic energy to maintain. This can lead to exhaustion, a sense of inauthenticity, and strained interpersonal relationships, as others often intuitively sense that the person's outward persona doesn't match their internal reality. Reaction formation reminds us that human behavior is rarely a straight line. Often, the loudest person in the room is the one most afraid of being heard. By understanding that our most intense outward stances might actually be shields for our inner vulnerabilities, we can develop a more nuanced view of ourselves and those around us. How to spot the mask in yourself and others. Identifying reaction formation requires looking past the behavior and into its intensity. In others, watch for the protest too much factor. The clearest sign is a response that is completely disproportionate to the situation. If a coworker claims they absolutely love a project, but discusses it with a forced, high-pitched enthusiasm and rigid body language, they may be masking deep resentment. Look for brittleness. If you gently challenge their stance and they react with explosive defensiveness or total shutdown, you've likely hit the raw impulse they are trying to hide. In yourself, the gut check for authenticity. To spot this in yourself, pay attention to your emotional exhaustion. Genuine emotions usually feel fluid and natural. If you find that being the nice guy or the perfect professional leaves you feeling drained, angry, or secretly judgmental of others, ask yourself, what is the opposite of what I'm showing right now? If the thought of expressing that opposite emotion, like anger or disagreement, feels terrifyingly wrong, you might be using reaction formation to avoid a truth about yourself that you aren't ready to face. If this deep dive helped you understand the why behind some of the most confusing human behaviors, make sure to hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that evidence-based psychology content matters.